It's easy to lead when everything's going right. But what about after a public feud with Jeudy and a crushing defeat? Shedeur Sanders stepped up to a microphone most players would have avoided and faced the backlash head-on. No hiding behind coaching staff, no shifting blame. He spoke about responsibility, spiritual warfare, and choosing forgiveness when resentment would have been easier. In a season full of missteps and viral moments, this was the one that mattered most. Because Sanders wasn't just defending his reputation, he was defining who he is.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
The deeper story isn't about a sideline spat. It's about what came after. Sanders turned inward and emerged clearer, stronger, and more grounded. While others criticized the coaching calls or speculated about locker room fractures, Sanders zeroed in on his own actions. He held up a mirror and found grace staring back. It's that unwavering focus on accountability, unity, and faith that now marks him as more than just a quarterback. He's becoming a symbol of what it means to lead through adversity, not around it. This wasn't your typical sports press conference. There were no cliches, no forced smiles, no we'll bounce back sound bites. What Shedeur Sanders gave the world was something very few athletes at any level are willing or able to offer. Emotional honesty grounded in unshakable faith. And it all started with a moment of chaos. The sideline dispute between Shedeur and veteran wide receiver Jeudy had already made the rounds. The clip went viral for all the wrong reasons. Cameras caught the tension. The body language said it all. Jeudy, the seasoned pro, getting visibly upset with Shedeur on national television, aggressive, animated, and seemingly indifferent to who was watching. Fans dissected it. Media ran with it. And while Jeudy kept quiet in the aftermath, Shedeur didn't retreat. He reflected. And then he came forward with something that shocked everyone. Forgiveness. But not just surface-level forgiveness. Not the type where you say the right thing to keep the locker room intact. This was deeper, more vulnerable. In his own words, Shedeur said he had to go through a week of mental and spiritual warfare. He had to pray. He had to sit with God. He had to do the internal work that most athletes never talk about publicly. And what came out of that? A press conference that people are calling one of the most emotionally intelligent moments in recent sports memory. He didn't dodge the tough parts. He didn't play down how difficult it was. He admitted to being in a dark place mentally. He admitted the season had taken a toll. He admitted that the conflict with Jeudy hit him hard, not just because of what was said, but because of what it meant. Shedeur explained that after the blow-up, he spent the week talking to God, trying to find peace. He didn't look outward. He didn't lash out. He looked inward. He tried to understand the why. Why it hurt. Why it escalated. And most importantly, how to move forward without bitterness. That's not just leadership. That's maturity beyond his years. He talked about love. About choosing to love someone who had hurt him. He said out loud, clear as day, I still love him. No qualifiers. No shade. Just truth. And then he did something even more meaningful. He threw Jeudy a touchdown. That wasn't just a football decision. It was a personal one. Shedeur made a conscious choice to uplift a teammate who, by all appearances, had turned on him during one of the most vulnerable points in the season. That moment didn't just show composure. It showed grace. And you could feel the weight of it in every word he spoke. This wasn't damage control. This wasn't media training. This was a young man choosing character over ego, unity over pride, and love over resentment. And he did it under a spotlight that hasn't exactly been kind to him this season. Because the truth is, things haven't been going well. The team is struggling. The offense has looked out of sync. There have been coaching missteps, including plays that were reportedly failing in practice and still called during games. There's confusion, frustration. Fans are restless. And in the middle of that storm, Shedeur stood there, fully aware of the optics, and took ownership, not just for the team's performance, but for his own. He openly took responsibility for a risky interception and a failed two-point conversion. He defended his coaches, even when the decisions didn't make sense. He made it clear, he's not here to pass the blame. He's here to lead. That level of accountability, especially in the middle of adversity, is rare. Most players would have pointed fingers. Shedeur absorbed it, and when it came time to talk about the team's emotional health, he didn't skip a beat. He said that his priority was making sure his teammates had joy, that they were mentally okay, that they felt supported. This is the part that stood out most. Shedeur isn't just focused on stats. He's focused on the spirit of the locker room. He checks in on his guys. He watches how they carry themselves. He's not just playing quarterback. He's managing emotions, culture, and cohesion. And it's not performative. It's who he is. He made it clear that his faith is the foundation for everything. He said that when things started to unravel mentally, spiritually, he turned to God, not out of habit, but out of necessity. He described his internal journey not as a quick reset, but as a spiritual battle that took prayer, discipline, and deep introspection. That kind of spiritual clarity doesn't just happen. You don't wake up with it. You have to work for it. And that's exactly what Shedeur did. The way he framed faith wasn't preachy or self-righteous. It was humble. He wasn't telling people how to live. He was explaining how he survives, how he grounds himself when the noise gets too loud. And in doing that, he made faith feel practical, like a survival tool, not just a belief system. And that's what hit home for so many people. Because yes, it's inspiring, but it's also real. Shedeur wasn't trying to look flawless. He was telling people exactly how broken he felt, and what helped him find peace again. He said he had to choose forgiveness, not because it was easy, not because it felt good, but because holding a grudge would only poison the team from the inside. That decision to forgive wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was leadership. And when you consider the environment he's in, a team facing disappointment, a locker room under pressure, a media spotlight always looking for a crack, what Shedeur did becomes even more powerful. He didn't just hold the line. He reinforced it. He reminded everyone that true leadership isn't about being the loudest voice or the most dominant presence. It's about consistency. It's about humility. It's about showing up for people, even when they don't show up for you. And more than anything, it's about staying anchored. That's what Shedeur Sanders has done. Through conflict, through chaos, through a viral moment that could have divided the team and wrecked the season, he stayed anchored to his faith, to his purpose, to his vision of what leadership really means. And yes, Jeudy may have walked away from that moment with regret, but the real takeaway isn't about him. It's about what Shedeur revealed in response. That's why this press conference has taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a reaction. It was a revelation. One that's going to stick with people long after the headlines fade. So now it's your turn. What did you think when you saw Shedeur's press conference? Did it change your view of him? Should more athletes be this transparent about their mental and spiritual struggles? Let's talk about it in the comments. If this resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that character still matters. And subscribe if you want more stories that get to the heart of the chaos, not just the noise around it. Because when everyone else is spiraling and one voice rises with truth, love, and leadership, that's the voice worth listening to. And what makes this entire moment even more unforgettable is that Shedeur Sanders didn't just talk about doing the hard thing. He did it in real time, in front of all of us. He didn't wait for things to cool down. He didn't hide behind statements crafted by PR teams. He walked straight into the fire. And he did it with a calm that didn't come from confidence. It came from conviction. Because let's be honest, most people, especially athletes under the kind of scrutiny Shedeur is constantly under, would have gone silent. Or worse, defensive. And no one would have blamed him. The pressure he's under is relentless. He's not just a quarterback. He's a quarterback. He's also the son of Coach Prime. Expectations aren't just high, they're astronomical. Every throw, every read, every misstep is judged in real time. So when the drama with Jeudy exploded on the sideline, the world waited for the usual script. Tension, fallout, icy silence, maybe a cryptic tweet. Instead, Shedeur gave us something we almost never see in moments like this. He gave us grace. He gave us spiritual depth. He gave us accountability. And he gave us a blueprint for how to lead in a way that doesn't destroy, but restores. This wasn't about optics. It wasn't about controlling the narrative. It was about being rooted in something deeper than public approval. And let's talk about the risk that came with that decision. Because when you choose vulnerability, you open yourself up to judgment. When you admit to mental and spiritual struggles, especially as a male athlete in a sport as brutal as football, people don't always applaud that. Some people mock it. Some say it's weakness, that you should toughen up, shake it off, be a man. Shedeur didn't just ignore those voices. He dismantled them. By speaking openly about how he had to pray for a week straight just to feel grounded again, he challenged the entire notion of what toughness actually means. It wasn't a motivational quote. It was a confession. He talked about the spiritual warfare he faced, not just because of the on-field mistakes or the losses, but because of the relational weight of that conflict with Jeudy, how it affected his peace, how it invaded his thoughts, and how it forced him to seek clarity outside of football. That's a lesson most people don't learn until their 30s. Shedeur is already walking in it. And that's exactly why his words resonated so deeply. Because they weren't just for his team. They were for anyone who's ever had to carry disappointment quietly. For anyone who's ever been betrayed and had to forgive without getting an apology. For anyone who's ever had to choose peace over pride when everything inside of them screamed otherwise. And the timing of all this matters. This wasn't some post-season reflection. This was said while the season was still unfolding, while the noise was still deafening, while the plays were still breaking down, and the coaching staff was still under fire. Shedeur didn't wait for clarity. He created it. Through prayer, through internal work, through the kind of discipline that doesn't come naturally, especially when you've got every reason to be angry. It would have been so easy for him to bury the moment, to isolate Jeudy, to quietly move on without acknowledgement. But instead, he threw him a touchdown. On purpose. That throw was more than a play call. It was a statement. It was Shedeur saying, "You may have disrespected me, but I won't return the energy. I'm choosing team unity over personal revenge. I'm choosing leadership over ego." And that's what really set this whole situation apart. Because in that moment, Shedeur reminded everyone watching that leadership isn't just about the way you celebrate. It's about the way you recover, the way you respond when someone throws shade, the way you take ownership for things that weren't entirely your fault, the way you defend a coaching staff, even when their calls are clearly questionable. He said it himself. Some of the plays being called during games hadn't even worked in practice. That is an organizational failure. And yet, Shedeur didn't criticize his coaches. He stood by them. He shouldered the blame. That's not blind loyalty. That's protection. That's someone who knows the difference between reacting and leading. And then there's the way he kept talking about the team's emotional well-being. Not their energy during practice. Not their competitiveness on the field. Their joy. He said he makes a priority to check in with his teammates, mentally and emotionally. That's rare. That's not just being a good teammate. That's emotional intelligence in action. And it says everything about the kind of culture Shedeur wants to build. Because let's face it, culture isn't just created by slogans on locker room walls. It's built through decisions like this. Forgive or retaliate. Unite or divide. Protect or expose. Shedeur made his choice clear. And he made it not in private, but publicly. Intentionally. Because he knows people are watching. Younger players. Teammates. Coaches. The media. Fans. And instead of trying to impress them, he showed them what it looks like to be grounded in faith when everything else is unstable. He said he talks to God constantly, that it's where he draws strength, that it's how he makes decisions under pressure. And in doing that, he showed that spiritual discipline isn't some side accessory. It's the core of his leadership. He's not trying to be a perfect athlete. He's trying to be a consistent man. And maybe that's the part that hits the hardest. Because we're used to seeing athletes craft their brand through performance. Shedeur is doing it through principles, through values, through faith, humility, and emotional honesty. And that's why this press conference went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was different. Different from the performative apologies. Different from the passive-aggressive comments. Different from the PR-filtered statements that don't actually say anything. What Shedeur gave us was real. He gave us a model for how to stay rooted when the storm hits, how to lead when you're not okay, how to choose peace when conflict feels more justified. And for anyone who's paying attention, that matters. Because whether you're a player, a coach, or just someone dealing with conflict in your own life, Shedeur's approach was a reminder that character isn't tested in comfort. It's tested in conflict. And how you show up in those moments, that's your legacy. And if you made it this far, you're probably feeling what the rest of us felt when that clip hit your feed, stopped in your tracks. Because it wasn't just the words Shedeur Sanders said that landed. It was the way he said them. Controlled. Calm. Not detached, but centered. This wasn't damage control. This was a spiritual debrief. The kind of moment where you realize this isn't just about football anymore. You could hear in his tone. This wasn't a player giving a quote. This was a person laying out a process. One that took days of wrestling, praying, and unlearning that instinct most of us have. To clap back, to hold on to anger, to harden up when someone wounds you. Shedeur did the opposite. He softened. Not in a weak way. In the strongest way possible. He said he couldn't get peace until he chose to forgive. Not because Jeudy apologized. Not because there was closure. Not because someone else made it right. But because he needed to make it right within. That kind of self-awareness is rare. That kind of ownership, even rarer. And it wasn't performative at all. He didn't make himself the hero. He admitted how hard it was. He admitted he was mentally exhausted, spiritually drained. That he had to keep talking to God, not for a perfect answer, but just for peace. This wasn't about strategy. It was about sanity. Because if you look at the broader context, this entire season has tested Shedeur in ways that numbers will never reflect. The blown plays, the losses, the mounting criticism, the spotlight, the coaching errors, the weight of being Deion Sanders' son, and the quarterback. He's been walking a tightrope with no safety net. And when that sideline drama with Jeudy erupted, it was just one more crack in an already stressed foundation. Except this time, it wasn't a faceless mistake or a nameless troll. It was someone in the locker room. Someone supposed to be a leader. And that stung. But Shedeur didn't let that wound infect the team. He didn't let it spread. He contained it through grace. And yes, grace is quiet. It doesn't trend like outrage does. But in that press conference, grace roared. He stood there and explained how he was able to throw a touchdown pass to someone who had just disrespected him days earlier, not out of obligation, but out of intent, because he wanted to build unity, because he still cared about Jeudy's joy, even if Jeudy hadn't cared about his dignity in the moment. That level of forgiveness is not natural. It's spiritual. It's learned. And it's what made Jeudy look small, without Shedeur ever throwing a single verbal jab. He didn't need to. His behavior said everything. And let's be clear, Jeudy's silence after all this has been deafening. He hasn't spoken publicly. He hasn't responded. Because what do you say when the person you humiliated turns around and honors you? You sit with that. That's why it's called instant regret. Not because Shedeur dragged him, but because he didn't. Because he showed everyone what dignity looks like when you could have chosen destruction. That touchdown wasn't a pass. It was a message. We're still teammates. We're still in this together. And I won't let one moment fracture what we're trying to build. Because here's the thing. Shedeur doesn't just talk about team unity. He embodies it. He checks in on his teammates. He watches their moods. He prioritizes their mental state over his own stats. He's not performing leadership. He's living it. And it's all anchored in faith. He said it clearly. He turns to God every single day. It's how he keeps his head when everything around him is spiraling. And in that press conference, he showed us exactly how that anchor holds. Because how else do you survive this kind of season? He's been under fire for things beyond his control. Coaching decisions, offensive breakdowns, play calls that didn't work in practice, but were still called during games. The kind of things that make quarterbacks throw up their hands and say, "This isn't on me." But Shedeur didn't say that. He took full responsibility for his interception, for the failed two-point conversion, for the parts of the game that he could control. That's the sign of a real leader, someone who doesn't separate themselves from the mess, but steps into it and says, "This starts with me." He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be, but he was honest. He was intentional. And above all, he was centered. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from all of this. Shedeur Sanders didn't give us a highlight reel moment. He gave us a moment of real life. He gave voice to the emotional and spiritual work that rarely gets acknowledged in sports. The kind that happens off camera, alone, in prayer, in silence, in reflection. The kind of work that actually makes someone better, not just bigger. And we don't see that often. We're used to press conferences that either sugarcoat or spiral. But this was different. It was structured around accountability, faith, and emotional clarity. It was Shedeur refusing to let a moment of immaturity from a teammate undo everything the team was trying to build. He didn't react. He responded. And that difference is everything. Because when you're building something real, something with foundation, with integrity, you don't let petty moments take you off course. You recenter. You forgive. You relead. And that's what Shedeur did. And it changed the entire narrative. People who were quick to criticize him for the team's struggles had to pause. People who thought they had him figured out had to reevaluate. Because in that moment, he didn't just show growth. He showed grace under pressure. And not just pressure from fans or coaches. Internal pressure. The kind that eats away at your peace if you don't process it properly. And he processed it properly. That's the message. That's the moment. That's why this clip didn't just go viral. It stayed viral. Because people don't forget when someone chooses dignity in a moment where everything says they shouldn't. They don't forget when someone owns their faults and forgives others in the same breath. They don't forget when someone leads like that. So now the question is, where does the team go from here? Does this become the turning point? Does the locker room rally around this leadership? Do more athletes start talking about their mental and spiritual struggles the way Shedeur did? Time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this wasn't just a headline. This was a moment that reframed what leadership looks like in sports today. And if you felt that shift too, if something about Shedeur's words stuck with you, say something. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what this moment meant to you. Like the video, if you respect what Shedeur did. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that character still matters. And subscribe if you want more stories that pull back the curtain and show you what really goes down when the lights are on and the pressure is high. Because this wasn't just another press conference. This was what grace, leadership, and faith in action look like. And we won't be forgetting it anytime soon.